I feel like you expect to see the machinery of influence right out in the open.
Oh, totally.
Right. Like when we think about the architects who build global movements or empires, we picture marble columns, sweeping architecture.
Yeah, treaties being signed with gold-tipped pens by people in silk or, heavy armor.
Exactly. It is the standard assumption.
Because we naturally look for visible markers of power, and usually that's accompanied by an exorbitant amount of wealth, elite status, and these massive public platforms.
But when you actually look at the early days of Christianity, that entire expectation just entirely shatters. We are not looking at marble columns today. We're looking at calloused hands, the stench of tanning vats, leather scraps, and literally a dining room table.
It's a completely different world.
It really is. So we have a massive stack of sources for this deep dive today. We've got historical guides to the Roman catacombs, some really dense biblical commentaries, and academic theological journals.
A lot of heavy reading for this one.
Oh, a ton. But our mission is to comb through them to reconstruct the lives of a first-century married couple. We are going to figure out how two very ordinary blue-collar tent makers shaped the trajectory of a global religion.
Yeah.
Okay, let's unpack this. What if you found out that the strategic masterminds behind the Apostle Paul's greatest historical successes were actually a working-class husband and wife just operating a clandestine network out of their living room?
I mean, it forces a complete rewrite of how we assume history is made. To grasp the mechanics of what they actually pulled off, we have to start with their human origins.
Right.
And the sources paint two very contrasting backgrounds that somehow collided in Rome. So let's look at the husband first. His name was Aquila.
Which means eagle in Latin, right?
Exactly. Eagle. He was a Jewish man born in the Roman province of Pontus, which is up near the Black Sea in modern-day Turkey.
Okay, so he's an immigrant.
He is. He's an immigrant who eventually makes his way to the absolute epicenter of the empire, which is Rome.
Which is where he meets his wife, Priscilla, or I guess more formally, Prisca.
Right, yeah. Priscilla is an affectionate diminutive form, meaning ancient. But what the historical commentaries really point out here is that Priscilla was likely a high Roman girl.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, the naming conventions and the historical context, they strongly suggest she came from a much higher social stratum. She possibly even possessed independent wealth, especially when you compare her to an immigrant Jewish husband.
So right out of the gate, you have this massive socioeconomic mismatch that would have totally raised eyebrows in ancient Rome.
Oh, 100%.
A potentially wealthy, high-born Roman woman marrying an immigrant tradesman. Because regardless of whatever money her family might have had in the past, their day-to-day reality was unequivocally blue-collar. The sources refer to them as tent makers and leather workers.
And we really need to linger on what that actually means, because it wasn't some clean, polite hobby.
No, not at all.
In the first century, leatherworking and tent making was grueling. I mean, physically punishing manual labor.
You're dealing with these heavy, stiff animal hides.
Yeah. Yes. And you are working with tanning processes that often involved urine.
Ugh, gross.
Right. It produced this completely foul stench. It required thick needles, heavy tools, and just immense physical hand strength.
So they are literally walking around with permanently stained, calloused hands. They probably smelled like their workshop.
They absolutely did. But, and this is key, that trade is the crucial mechanism of their independence. By manufacturing and repairing heavy canvas and leather goods, which were essential for the Roman military and for merchants, they were entirely self-sufficient.
Well, that makes sense.
They didn't have to rely on wealthy benefactors or, aristocratic patrons to fund their lives. They paid their own way through sweat equity.
That independence is great until the political climate completely turns against you.
Right.
So it's AD 49, Emperor Claudius is ruling Rome, and he just drops this massive edict expelling all Jews from the city. The Roman historian Suetonius actually wrote that this expulsion was caused by constant public disturbances over someone named Christus.
Which is almost certainly a Roman phonetic misunderstanding of Christos, or Christ.
Right.
Rome just didn't have the theological vocabulary to see Christianity as a brand new religion yet. To the Roman state, this was just a messy, loud, internal debate within the Jewish community that was disrupting the peace of the capital.
Just a local nuisance to them.
Exactly. So Claudius uses a blunt instrument. He just kicks everyone out.
And the mechanics of that are terrifying.
Yeah.
It's not just a political inconvenience for them. It is state-sponsored confiscation of your entire life.
Yeah.
Aquila and Priscilla are forced to abandon their workshop, their clientele, their home and whatever social standing they had. They're essentially reduced to refugees overnight.
Fleeing with whatever tools they can carry.
Right, and they head to the Greek port city of Corinth. It's kind of like modern-day entrepreneurs losing their flagship store overnight because of a political upheaval.
It's total devastation. They lose the network they spent years building.
But here is what I am trying to synthesize from the sources. This massive, heartbreaking disruption actually functions as the perfect logistical setup for what they're about to do.
It really does, and it's because of the specific geography of where they landed and who they bumped into.
Right.
Corinth was a massive, gritty, highly transient port city. It was full of sailors, merchants, travelers. And while they are trying to rebuild their leather business from scratch there, they meet another Jewish tentmaker who had also just arrived in the city.
And his name was Paul.
His name was Paul.
And this is where the popular mythology of early Christianity just gets dismantled for me. You don't have these legendary figures meeting in a seminary, or debating in some ivory tower, or sitting in a polished missionary boardroom. They meet elbow deep in animal hides. They bonded over a shared grueling trade.
That shared labor was the catalyst. Because they are in the exact same trade, Aquila and Priscilla invite Paul to live and work with them. And what's fascinating here is how this act of hospitality completely shifted their trajectory. Well, their leather shop wasn't just a way to pay the bills anymore. It became the ultimate front for a new movement. Think about the mechanics of a first-century repair shop in a massive port city.
Well, I mean, everyone needs something fixed.
Precisely. Merchants need leather repaired, travelers need tents patched. It naturally funnels this constant, completely untraceable stream of diverse people right into their workspace.
Oh, wow.
They didn't need to stand on a street corner and yell to get an audience, which, by the way, would have gotten them arrested anyway.
Right.
They just seamlessly blended their evangelism with their commercial trade.
That is a brilliant strategy. They let the market bring the people right to them.
Exactly.
And the bond that forms in that workshop is so intense that after a year and a half of working alongside Paul in Corinth, they make another radical decision. When Paul decides to leave, they don't just wave goodbye from the docks.
No, they pack up everything.
They pack up their tools, they sail with him across the Mediterranean to Syria, and eventually Paul stations them in the city of Ephesus to lay the groundwork for the church there.
And this transition to Ephesus marks the beginning of their true radical mission. Priscilla and Aquila had mastered a very specific mechanism for spreading the faith, which is the oikos, or the house church.
Right, because they couldn't just build a megachurch.
No. We have to remember that in the Roman Empire, you couldn't just rent a public hall and start preaching an unapproved, illegal religion. Centralized buildings were incredibly easy targets for Roman authorities to raid and shut down.
So they essentially built a decentralized network.
Yes.
If you think about how we structure resilient tech systems today, you don't put all your data on one massive server that can be unplugged. You spread it out across hundreds of small, independent nodes.
That's a great analogy.
And Priscilla and Aquila were building the nodes. When you control a private, commercial household, you dictate who comes in and out. They turn their living room into an untraceable, secure hub for theological instruction.
And that decentralized model is exactly why the empire couldn't crush them. You can burn down a temple, but you can't police every single dining room table in the Mediterranean. And their table in Ephesus is where we see their theological chops truly tested. The sources highlight this one incident with a man named Apollos.
Oh, here's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah. So Apollos arrives in Ephesus, and the texts describe him as a brilliant, highly educated, eloquent orator from Alexandria, Egypt, and he is boldly preaching in the synagogue about Jesus.
But there is a glaring mechanical flaw in his theology.
There is.
The sources explicitly say he only knew about the baptism of John the Baptist. Which, okay, for a secular listener, that might just sound like minor religious trivia, but mechanically, it's a massive problem.
It's huge.
It means Apollos was preaching a message of repentance, but he didn't actually know the history of Jesus' resurrection, and he had literally no concept of the Holy Spirit. He basically had the prologue of the book, but was missing the entire main story.
And because he is such a gifted, persuasive speaker, that incomplete theology is actually super dangerous.
Yeah, people are going to follow him.
Exactly. He could accidentally start a massive splinter sect based on half-truths. Now, in many religious circles, if a superstar preacher is getting the doctrine wrong, the immediate reaction is public shaming, a fierce debate, or even excommunication.
You call them out to protect the brand.
Right. But Priscilla and Aquila deploy a completely different strategy here. The book of Acts uses a very specific Greek verb to describe their reaction, which is proslambanu.
Proslambani.
Yeah, it means to deliberately, personally, and warmly take someone to oneself.
That is radical diplomacy right there.
Yeah.
They don't embarrass him in the synagogue. They invite this brilliant orator into their home, probably pour him a drink, sit him at that dining room table, and they correct his theology privately. The text says they explain the way of God more accurately.
They discipled the superstar.
Yeah.
And this interaction introduces one of the most striking friction points in our historical sources regarding gender dynamics.
Oh, yeah. This is big.
Out of the 6 times this married couple is mentioned in the New Testament, Priscilla is named first 4 times.
Which, in a highly patriarchal Greco-Roman society where the husband's name is legally and culturally always listed first, is screamingly unusual. It's like a neon sign flashing in the text.
It is highly disruptive to ancient norms. And to be clear, it still causes significant friction in modern church dynamics today.
I know our theological journals dive really deeply into this debate.
They absolutely do. So on one side, you have egalitarian scholars who view Priscilla's instruction of Apollos and her top billing in Paul's letters as mechanical proof of female leadership and teaching authority in the early church. There's even a scholar, Ruth Hoppen, who advances a serious theory that Priscilla might be the anonymous author of the book of Hebrews.
Wait, really?
Yeah, which is arguably the most theologically sophisticated text in the entire New Testament.
Okay, that would be a massive historical plot twist.
It would fundamentally alter biblical scholarship. But conversely, you have complementarian scholars who look at the exact same source material and draw a different mechanical conclusion.
Right. They look at other texts.
Yes. They point to other writings by Paul, specifically 1 Timothy 2.11, which restricts women from teaching or holding authority over men. So these scholars argue that Priscilla's private instruction of Apollos, alongside her husband in a domestic setting, does not equate to her holding an official, authoritative pastoral office.
Right. Now, our goal here isn't to validate either theological camp. We're just reporting that Priscilla's legacy is so undeniably potent that 2,000 years later, scholars are still actively warring over her exact level of authority based on these texts.
Exactly.
It's a fascinating tension. But wait, let me just challenge the underlying premise of this for a second.
Okay.
If Rome is this hyper-patriarchal, rigid society, wouldn't putting a woman front and center like naming her first, having her instruct men be a terrible marketing strategy for a new illegal religion?
You would think so.
Right. Was Paul doing this to intentionally subvert Roman culture? Or was this just like desperate pragmatism? Like we're an underground movement being hunted by the state. We need literally whoever is competent and willing to help.
The sources suggest it leans heavily toward the latter. Raw survival pragmatism. When you are operating in a legal underground resistance, you just do not have the luxury of benching your most capable operatives based on societal gender norms.
Right. Use who you have.
If Priscilla is the better theologian or the better networker, you utilize her, and that pragmatic danger leads directly into their physical legacy. Because they weren't just hosting polite dinner parties.
No.
In his letter to the Romans, chapter 16, Paul calls them his synergoi, his co-workers, and publicly thanks them for having risked their necks for his life.
And we really need to clarify that risked their necks isn't some cute metaphor for like taking a career risk.
No, it is literal physical peril. While the text doesn't explicitly date the end, historians link this to a massive, deadly riot that broke out in the Ephesian theater. Local silversmiths realized this new Christian movement was hurting their sales of pagan idols, so they sparked a violent mob. The implication here is that Priscilla and Aquila physically intervened or hid Paul, literally putting their own bodies between a lynch mob and their friend.
That willingness to put their physical bodies on the line didn't stop with a riot in Ephesus either. We actually see that same exact protection of the persecuted etched in stone centuries later in Rome.
Yes, the catacombs.
Exactly. The sources detail the catacomb of Priscilla. And you guys, this isn't just a small basement. It is a massive 7-mile underground labyrinth on the Via Salaria in Rome. It contains the burials of 7 early popes and more than 300 martyrs who were slaughtered by the state.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, we do need to be precise with the historical connection here. Historians actively debate the namesake of this specific catacomb.
Right, who actually owned it.
Yeah. Some argue it was named after our Priscilla, the tent maker, while others theorize it was a wealthy patron from the aristocratic Acilia Glabrionis family who donated her private land to the church for burials.
But regardless of whose signature was actually on the deed to the land, The physical site perfectly proves the mechanism we are talking about, right? The quiet infrastructural power of early Christian women that our Prisca pioneered.
Exactly. The catacombs show us a lived religion, this entire underground ecosystem where female leadership and patronage were absolutely vital.
And the artwork down there is just staggering. That catacomb houses the earliest known image of the Virgin Mary nursing baby Jesus, dated right around 230 to 240 CE.
It's incredible.
And there are these ancient inscriptions honoring female leaders, including one dedicated to a widow named the Mother Reina, or Regina. It clearly associates her with a formalized position of power and respect within the community.
It really proves that women, whether they were blue-collar tent makers dodging riots or wealthy aristocrats leveraging their property, were the financial and logistical engines keeping the movement alive. Without their infrastructure, the theology never makes it out of the first century.
It just dies out. Which brings up a great question about their stamina, because this couple, they just keep moving. After Emperor Claudius dies in AD 54, that expulsion edict against the Jews is lifted. Do they stay in Ephesus?
No. True to their transient rhythm, they pack up their leatherworking tools again. By AD 55, they are back in Rome.
Wow.
We know this because when Paul writes his letter to the Romans, he specifically sends greetings to the church meeting in their house. They immediately set up another node in the network.
So they just go right back into the belly of the beast. But they don't even retire there, do they?
They never really retire. Later pastoral letters in the New Testament indicate they traveled back to Ephesus yet again. Paul asks them to go support Timothy, a younger leader who was really struggling to manage the Ephesian church.
Just constantly on the move.
Constantly. And finally, ancient Christian tradition states that they eventually returned to Rome one last time where their luck ran out and they were martyred together for their faith.
They died exactly as they lived, working together as a single unit. And today, they are venerated as saints across multiple major traditions. The Catholic and Anglican churches celebrate their feast day on July 8th. The Orthodox churches commemorate them on February 13th. And they even honor Aquila alone as an apostle on July 14th.
This raises an important question, though. If we connect all these movements, from Pontus to Rome to Corinth to Ephesus, back to Rome, back to Ephesus, it raises a profound question about how we fundamentally view history.
Yeah.
Priscilla and Aquila remind us that the Apostle Paul was never a one-man show. We have this deeply ingrained mythology of the lone genius changing the world through sheer willpower, but that is complete fiction.
Right.
Priscilla and Aquila represent the ultimate lay workers. Just look at the mechanics of their life, moving every 3 to 5 years, setting up a grueling leather business just to fund themselves, opening their home to strangers, and methodically, quietly building the physical infrastructure of a global faith.
So what does this all mean for you listening right now? The primary takeaway here is that the explosive expansion of early Christianity wasn't just driven by miraculous events or brilliant theological speeches in public squares.
Not at all.
It was driven by the smell of tanning leather. It was driven by the exhaustion of manual labor, by open dining room tables, by shared meals, and by the beautifully equal partnership of a husband and a wife who were willing to risk their livelihoods and their very necks for a friend and a cause they believed in.
They provided the physical, logistical, and emotional spaces where a hunted faith could actually take root and survive the hostility of the Roman Empire.
And I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over today. Everything we know about Aquila and Priscilla primarily comes through the letters of Paul and the historical writings of Luke. We only get to see them through the eyes of the men they protected and funded. But I want you to imagine for a second, if archaeologists unearth a letter written by Priscilla herself, imagine her detailing the mechanics of what it was actually like to be a female refugee, a blue-collar leather worker, and a hunted religious minority managing a radical, decentralized underground network right in the shadow of the Roman Empire.
That would be unbelievable.
Right. How much of history's greatest movements are built by people whose names we know, but whose own words we've entirely lost? When we look for the architects of history, we are so trained to look for the marble columns. But maybe we should be looking for the leather scraps,